Nation. I'm really torn about how much detail to get into regarding what I think is going to be NBA policy moving forward regarding the lottery. In no small measure because I'm not sure I understand it. I'm not even sure if we talked about it for 30 minutes that we would be any closer to understanding it. But on the other hand, it's such a big story, and we're going to get to plenty of Wolf stuff with Mitch Lawrence. So I guess, Mitch, I'm going to make the floor yours on this, and God bless you and good luck to you trying to explain what we think or know is going to be the policy change that the league has made. Do you know what that is? Do you understand it? And is there a simple way to sort of lay it out to our audience?
Great to lead with this, Dan. How you doing?
It's like I want to get it out of the way.
Yeah, right. Well, they've tried to come up with a way to force teams to try to win again. And they're going, what a novel
concept.
Idea,
yes.
Right? Well, and what they're doing with the lottery is they're going to penalize teams that finish in the bottom three. The three worst records are going to lose a ping pong ball or several or whatever.
Okay.
I think one. And then they also have, you can't finish, first 2 years in a row, and you can't finish in the bottom 5 3 years in a row.
Okay.
So they're going to penalize all that stuff. And is it a overcorrection to what's going on? I think I've heard that word used a lot, and the teams will still figure out a way. To me, the basic thing is there a system that could be fair and that could be pretty much 99% guaranteed where you award the worst teams with the best picks? Is that possible? That's what they're trying to do. I don't know if they can ever achieve that, but these are some of the changes that Adam Silver has made because obviously when the tanking starts in January, not, in March, but, months earlier, it's a huge problem for a league that charges top dollar for people come out to see teams that ostensibly are trying to win, but all they're trying to do is lose. So it's a mess still to me. I don't know if these changes are going to work. Yeah. It sounds like on the surface they may, but who knows? Who knows?
That's a pretty good summation. I think that's simplifying it as much as possible. And again, you're right. No one knows if because the assumption is always, it's like with illegal substances, right? The cheaters are always ahead of the testers. They always find, what the testers haven't even thought of yet from a substance standpoint. And same here. The assumption is there's so much creativity in this form of cheating or tanking that we're never going to be sure that someone else is out there already going, well, go ahead, you're going to do this, this, and this. Well, here's my calculation on that, and here's how we'll get around that. But you have to try, right? I think you at least have to take your best shot at it.
And it's interesting. It's like they say if these rules had been in effect if these new changes, I should say, had been in effect over the last few years, then the, several teams that are now, like the Spurs would not have been able to have gotten, Victor Wembanyama and other guys. So they're using that as a kind of a reference point. It's all up in the air to me. It's all, we'll have to prove it. All I know is this, small market teams, which traditionally don't get big name guys who are free agents, who have to build exclusively through the draft, I think they're probably worried from their standpoint is that if they have a legitimately bad roster and they're trying to rebuild a team through the draft and then they're going to start getting penalized, is that fair in nature? And they may have a point. So I don't think, though, I think the fact that Adam Silver, this stuff has come out, they would not float this out from the league unless they pretty much knew they were going to get the 23 out of the 30 votes. That's the way that works. So they probably know going in, all this stuff's going to pass, and then we'll see if it actually works or not.
More to come on that. Mitch Lawrence, of course, longtime NBA big knocker, has written on the NBA for decades. Former colleague of mine at the Dallas Morning News. Then he went New York on the bit, and these days can be heard often as the number one super sub on the Sirius XM NBA channel as well. You know the Wolves' predicament. On the one hand, they are in position to eliminate Denver. They are back home after losing Game 5. Crowds have been good. They've played very well here, but you know who they are missing from the lineup. So how do you look at it? Do you look at it as, because I've heard some people say, no, it's Denver's going to win 3 in a row, and it might not even be close in most of the games. And I've heard other people say, they might be able to sneak one out. And the assumption, of course, is that you're going to want to do it in front of the home crowd if you're going to do it at all. How do you view this series right now?
Well, the Spurs are rooting for the Wolves. That's the way that is.
Yeah,
they want to play a depleted team without Anthony Edwards and DiVincenzo off the bat. So that's where their rooting interest. Listen, I don't put it past Minnesota to win one more game. This Denver team, I think when we last talked, I picked Denver in this series just based on the fact that they were coming into the playoffs on a major role. The T-Wolves were all kinds of messed up on their offense. But I did leave, I remember saying this specifically, is that the good news is that Minnesota was going to go up against one of the worst defensive teams in the playoffs.
Absolutely.
And that they could have their way and maybe get into some shootouts. Of course, we didn't know what was going to transpire in this series at all in terms of the injuries. But I still think that Minnesota, they're up 3-2. So technically they're in the driver's seat, except for when you look at the roster. But you're still playing a team in Denver that has problems defending. Now, how that's going to play out, I don't know. I still think, look, to me, it's also one of these deals with Jokic, who is considered, if he wins another title, gets Denver to a finals, he's already got a certain status among centers. This would help his legacy. The flip side is, what happens if they lose to, if he and his and the team he's leading now happens to lose to a depleted team without its star player? How does that impact the legacy? That is a definite, for him, that would be a kind of a disaster. It's not going to take away from what he's done in Denver, but it certainly adds to the permanent record, and not in a good way. So there's a lot of pressure on Denver to get out of this series. I mean,
that's fair.
You cannot lose to how are you going to explain that you're going to lose to a Minnesota team without Anthony Edwards and Dante DiVincenzo, especially Anthony Edwards, who's considered a top player in the NBA? That is going to be something that you're not going to hear the end of. So listen, I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota did win this series, but also there's so much pressure still on the Nuggets that I think that somehow Jokic will find a way to at least to get to the next round against the Spurs.
Well, here's the kicker about this series. To this point, the thing that has held Denver back or put them in a position where they find themselves still down in the series 3-2 is their offense hasn't been as all-worldly as it was. I think analytically one of the best offenses in basketball history. I think, that's what's fascinated me, Mitch, is that now the last game we saw more of, I think, the real Joker, but we've seen very little of the sure, confident approach from him. There's even been times where it looks to me like he's passing up shots, passing up opportunities. Jamal Murray has not been an efficient scorer at all in this series. And I do give credit to the Wolves defensively there, because I think Rudy has made it surprisingly tough on him. And obviously Jaden has been very good outside largely on Jamal. And that to me is the question. We know the Wolves are going to have more challenges scoring, but can they muster up one more defensive performance against a Denver team that really needs to outscore you, right? Because they're not suddenly going to learn how to guard.
No. And Jokic in the series, especially early in the series, man, he was brutal. And Rudy was really outplaying him. And that was really, wow, for people around the league, that was something amazing to behold, because they thought going into the series, the Joker was going to have all kinds of advantages. And, Jamal Murray, too, having a phenomenal year. But when you mention the regular season, this is why people have to be careful about how, do things just transfer automatically to the regular season. Did you expect Detroit, who basically beat up, out-physicaled, and out-tough teams, to basically get that thrown in their face and be out-physicaled and out-tough by the Orlando Magic in a series?
No.
I don't think anybody expected that. Nope. I think we all expected from the regular season, Detroit will probably have problem scoring, but it won't be until later in the playoff rounds. So you got to be careful about what you see in the regular season and if it does in fact translate. But I'll tell you what, you raise a great point. I mean, the Joker has had some really bad. This, in a lot of ways, was his worst playoff series.
Yeah,
and he still has a lot going for him, and they've got so much going for him. And I still think that pressure. I know that pressure can work against you, but I think it can work in this way as a way to get them back past Minnesota to the next round. So it's a fascinating series from that standpoint.
One of the debates that's broken out here is with the extra day. Everybody's got to find extra things to think about. We all have time to do that. And one of the discussions has been, all right, from the Wolves' perspective, knowing who's missing, what's their formula offensively for success? Is it incredible balance, or are you going to have one of your other best scorers, maybe Randall, maybe DeSumo, who had that 43-point game?
Yes.
One of your guys is, or maybe it's even Naz Reid. Somebody is going to have shoot the lights out, have an otherworldly kind of game, 30-plus points. That's going to be mandatory. Which way do you think is potentially the best formula for success for the Wolves offensively?
Yeah, that's a good question. Plus, there's the question of in a tight game down the stretch, who you're going to.
Great point. Yep.
That way, there could be someone who you mentioned, maybe somebody else, another player, who all of a sudden puts together a huge thing. Because if this is a close game, which I kind of figure it probably will be, being where it's played and the fact that, Minnesota, this is it for them to close out. This is their best shot. In a tight game down the stretch, who do they go to? So that's all stuff I don't know how to put any kind of way. You know the team better than I do. Who would you expect? Would it be Randall? Would it be, DeSumo's 43-point game was just like, wow, that was like a revelation. But that was an incredible, and that speaks volumes about, they didn't think they were going to trade for him for that.
No.
But obviously that was a significant upgrade, which we knew at the time. So I don't know. That's a great question, and those are the type of answers that we won't know for until it happens.
Yeah, it's in a lot of this, I think, goes back. This is where I think a coach can matter. I really do. Now, he can't go and play, but I think getting the feel of a given game, right? All right, and picking up the vibe on, all right, here's the guy I see tonight, based on what I'm seeing early, that might have the best chance to finish this thing. That I think it's the kind of night where a coach can earn his money. Yeah, and that'll be interesting. Of course, in a tight game, you got to worry about on the other side, on the flip side, Murray and Jokic, because you figure one of those guys has a better chance of pulling maybe Denver through than someone who hasn't done it before in the playoffs. That's the thing. That's what I think Denver in a lot of ways will be banking on the championship experience of those guys, even though it happened a couple of years ago. They've done it in big spots. Who's really done it in the biggest spots for Minnesota? That they don't have those players. So let's get some history.
We'll see what happens. It's going to be a fun night.
It will, and let's get some history from you. Now, Jaden obviously has been the straw that stirs the drink in this series, right? With the comments he made early about, well, we know our plan is they don't have any good defensive they're bad defensive players. He named them off very matter-of-factly. And to this point, quite frankly, it's not like Denver has been able to do anything with the bulletin board material. You covered a lot of NBA playoffs and a lot of off days. So did his approach, his commentary, which is pretty unusual in these playoffs, these years, right, where everybody doesn't seem to want to get in anybody else's face, right? They might privately, but they don't publicly. Does that remind you of any series, or are there any precedents for the approach, the direct approach Jaden has really took on the front end and then has sort of doubled and tripled down on ever since?
Well, I'm sure there was I'm trying to think, off the top of my head about bulletin board material back in the day where there were, guys were, if you talk to Charles Barkley in the course of a series, or you talk to, anybody else, Larry Bird, or, guys were pretty much upfront about, we think we're the better team and we can do such and such. And we wrote about it. And of course, when it came to nobody ever talked smack against Michael Jordan.
No, that's a good
because
point.
they knew it was going to be that was a waste of time. It was going to backfire because that's the last thing you wanted to do. But I thought McDaniel's thing was really interesting because that's what I tried to base. I didn't say no, they don't have any good defenders, but we knew that they were a terrible, kind of a bad defensive team. So it really, for everybody else outside of this series, when we're looking at it, that was throwing down the gauntlet like we hadn't seen in a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And was like, wow, you got to back that up, which they did. So I don't know if it's, you're closer to it, how it turned out in terms of how it fueled anybody's fire. But in terms of historically, I just can't think off the top of my head about specifics of things. I remember once I covered, I think it was this was back when Utah was in the late 90s, finally getting to some finals, and John Stockton was driving the Rockets up the wall. I think they were in the Western Conference Finals. This is when Barkley spent a lot of time bemoaning the fact that John Stockton was a dirty player. John Stockton ended up making the big shot of the series that propelled Jazz to the finals, so that kind of worked against Barkley. But it didn't seem to affect him going forward. He still talked his mind.
Well, to your point, I think part of the reason that the Jaden commentary stood out is it's so unusual now, and it part of what I liked about it, and other people have certainly said this as well, is that if you remember a league in which players didn't like each other or didn't feel compelled after games to necessarily break bread, immediately, that there was that kind of chippiness without being absurd, that this almost felt like more like back then, where I'm not going to feel obligated to say nothing but nice things or be polite, whatever the case may be. No, I might not like you. We might not like you. And I think people have gravitated towards it a little bit because it can be a little annoying to see, even regular season games, obviously, a devastating loss, and 30 seconds later, you're planning your dinner later that night with somebody on the opposing team. It just doesn't, for the Kevin McHale's of the world, that stuff has just never set very well.
No, you're right about that. Yeah, I mean, listen, the last, I don't know how many years now with a lot of guys credit or point to the AAU affiliations that these guys have, rising through the ranks when they're in junior high, maybe even earlier. So you're playing and you're seeing and you're befriending guys who, a few years later you're coming into the league with, and so you don't look at them warily. You don't look at them as rivals. You're looking at them as buddies. And we just happen to play on different teams. The league has lost, to me, a lot in terms of having guys come in who naturally just are wary of each other, don't like each other, and that's the way that rivalries blossom. Plus, back when I'm talking in an age where Kevin Durant, there was no such thing as a Kevin Durant bouncing around teams, or even a LeBron James.
Right.
These are guys who stayed with their teams until maybe the last very end where they would go somewhere else. I'm talking about Patrick Ewing finally leaving the Knicks, or Michael Jordan playing for the Wizards. But those guys didn't, early in their careers, team up, and they certainly didn't move from city to city like we've had, especially with a guy like Durant. So, yeah, it's a whole different world. And I think it is definitely, that whole thing to me kind of diluted the whole competitive fire that the league used to have, because the playoffs to me had a different tone. They were actually more insanely, what's the word? I mean, there was a lot more, these playoffs were a lot more hate. And it was reflected in the fact, I saw a stat today, Dan, that in the Joe Mazzulla era, last 3 years, the Celtics are 19-12 in home games. Back then, they didn't, I don't know if Larry Bird lost 12 home games in his career in Boston.
Yeah.
And so that's just a big difference in the way that the game is played and the game and how times have changed. And to me and other people, it's not for the better, but it is what it is.
You mentioned the Celtics. Should Celtics fans be at all worried with the team's inability to close out Philly, or is that just one of those momentary blips and that they'll be fine closing out Philadelphia?
Boy, this is a whole
actually a better road team. So that gives them hope. But listen, now we have Joel Embiid, who could be a factor.
Yep.
And they don't have anybody who can guard Joel Embiid. And you saw what happened last night when he stopped shooting threes and went down into the low box area or down the foul line and started to torch Boston. And, of course, they had great play on the perimeter from their guys. And so now, to me, that's a very competitive series, which I didn't expect. And I'm not saying Joel Embiid is going to come back and have a great game the next game out, because I just don't know. I mean, he's come back off an appendicitis.
Yep.
And who knows how, So, no, I think Boston, listen, we all know that the crazy thing about Boston is it's kind of like right there staring everybody in the face. When they shoot really well for 40% above on threes, they win games in the playoffs. And when they shoot below 40%, they lose, which is kind of like, that's the easy way out stat, but that kind of holds up. So I got to figure this might go 7. I mean, I just don't know if they can here's the problem for Boston too. It's not just that. Jaylen Brown, Tatum's not, he's back and he's been back, but he's not vintage Jason Tatum that we've seen. Jaylen Brown has moments where he reverts to just being, he's not in the flow. He's trying to do too much. And then Derek White, who's meant so much for that team over the last few years, has been a disaster shooting the ball.
He's slumping.
And so those things, even though they're out on the court and they are, they're the Celtics kind of in name only. They're not they're not a premier Celtic team with those guys. They're a cut below. So they're more susceptible. They may be, listen, they get out of this round against Philly. Let's say they win in 6 and they play the Knicks. They're not going to be, they may be favored. They'll have home court, but they're, to me, a very vulnerable Celtic team. This is not the best Celtic team that we've seen with those players that won a title and have gone further, in the last couple of years.
I appreciate you as always, man. We'll be in touch as this stuff plays out. Thank you, Mitch.
All right, Dan. Take care. Thanks.
Mitch Lawrence, a longtime NBA writer, now NBA broadcaster, giving us some good NBA insight. We got a lot of show and a lot of two good guests left to wrap up this program at 6:30, or by the time we're done at 6:30. Kessler in studio in about an hour. And how about our guy, Lou Raguse? He's been covering some pretty tantalizing stuff the last several days. We'll give him a chance to sort of reintroduce some subjects that we've explored with him before, and they're taking even stranger twists and turns in at least one or two cases. Mr. Raguse from KARE 11 is next.
The fan at BigDeck.com want to give you a shot to win bonus bucks. It is our national cash contest. 4 o'clock keyword is rich. Go to KFAN.com and enter the keyword rich.
Looks like another bullpen meltdown for the Twins. A rarity since the bullpen was gutted at the trade deadline last year. We end up losing after we were down 2-0, took a 3-2 lead, and then gave up, I think, 3 runs in the ninth, right? We ended up losing 5-3 to the Seattle Mariners.
So we lose 2 of 3 after a very dominant performance on night 1.
You are indeed correct. Lou Raguse covers all sorts of interesting stories, a lot of crime stories, quite frankly, for KARE 11, and he's kind enough to join us now via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. How have you been, sir?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Always good to have you. I do need some help, though, from you on a couple of stories. I had mentioned earlier in promoting this visit that every time somebody says, well, there's no creativity left in the Feeding Our Future story, as weird as it's been, it can't get any weirder. It can't get any more creative. What do we learn? We learn, not so fast, my friend. It's almost like a Wagnerian opera. It just goes on and on and on. So give the folks who have not been paying attention some details on the Amy Bach developments here that you have been covering very closely.
Yeah, so Amy Bach is going to get hauled into court tomorrow on accusations from the prosecution that she has been distributing protected materials, meaning documents that the public is not supposed to see, to reporters. And I am one of the reporters who received some documents. The ones that I received are not exciting in any way. It was very redundant. But apparently she sent more to the Star Tribune, according to this filing by the prosecution, which would include interviews, FBI interviews, which would be very interesting content to receive. Among the allegations, though, of how she did this is that she contacted one of her kids, a college-age son, and instructed him to create a fake name, fake email address, and then start reaching out to the press and Republican politicians who she thought might be receptive to the idea that this is all the Democratic government's fault and not her fault.
And wasn't there an allegation here or suggestion that the Star Tribune was coordinating with Bach's counsel as well? I think the Star Tribune is denying that, but isn't that part of the story as well?
Yeah, that is something that she said on a jail call with some unknown woman. And I mean, I think that is highly unlikely that there's coordination. Granted, it'll all come out how it's going down, but the Star Tribune says it should go without saying that we're not coordinating with her. But obviously, they are working on a story. They are in communications, and I would presume if they have FBI interviews, that would be a pretty interesting article as well. Bach
is, of course, the former executive director of Feeding Our Future. This is the $300 million fraud scheme. So I got a couple texts from people close to the program who have some experience with this kind of stuff, who's basically said, this is crazy stuff. This is not the sort of leaking these sorts of reports is like something that this individual in particular said that he had never seen. What are the ramifications of it? I mean, can it be sanctioned? Does Bach's counsel have a right to do what they're doing, even if it seems that unusual? Or what are the rules on this?
Well, it seems like they believe that they do, and that, but you know what? She's about to be sentenced, and from her perspective, she might not have a lot to lose. So the judge can take away her access, but she might not care anymore, her access to these documents. They could cut off her conversations, her telephone privileges and email privileges, which I'm sure her attorney is going to argue against, because her kids is pretty much all she has to talk to while she's in jail. And so that could be something that happens. Whether the judge would give her a harsher sentence, I think it all kind of plays into the idea of, is this somebody who is guilty and has any remorse or any, redemptive qualities? It might play towards the judge thinking, you obviously right to the bitter end are trying to find ways to get out of this.
Do we know what the range of possibilities are here in terms of jail time?
Technically, it could be up to life.
Really?
And I think it's something like 30 years to life is what the prosecution can argue for. Mm-hmm. We don't know yet what they're going to ask for, but I'm going to bet that they ask for 30 years at least.
How did you handle the materials that were sent to you? How have you handled that situation?
Well, I've received things from what I presume are phony email addresses that I presume originate with Amy Bach pretty much throughout the entirety of this. The problem is none of it that I received reached the point of this is groundbreaking stuff that would make a really interesting story. It's more like, okay, well, thank you for sending this. And is there more that to what you're saying here, or is this it? Because I mean, it basically would consist of emails that were sent between Feeding Our Future and the Department of Education. Just as an example, an email that says, an email of Amy Bach trying to report somebody for fraud. And it's there, you see, she was trying to report this person for fraud. She was trying to stop the fraud. She wasn't committing the fraud. And, you don't have any other context to go along with it other than this email that you're sent from an anonymous person. And it's what do you really do with that? It's just none of it ended up in my reporting throughout the way here. There is one, I do have one comparable though. So there was a case a couple of years ago that a lot of people remember where a dad was shot on Highway 169 by a road rage driver while he was driving home with his son from a baseball game. So that suspect, that defendant, the killer, the guy who was eventually convicted, before his case, he had called me out of the blue from jail, and he said that he was going to start sending me these reports, these like ballistic reports and stuff like that, that he said would show that the shooter was actually the passenger in the back seat and not him. And I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, whatever you send, I'll take a look at. That jail call got intercepted. The prosecutors tried to, you know, like cut off his access to the records and stuff like that, and they were trying to subpoena me to come in and testify. All that kind of ended up getting resolved without me having to go testify and so forth, and it ended up looking bad for him in his trial. But that's like kind of a comparable to what Amy Bach allegedly did here regarding the Star Tribune.
And in this case, though, the stuff you're getting doesn't say it's coming from Amy Bach, correct?
It says Daisy Hill, which is
Daisy
kind of a
Hill.
phony.
Okay.
Daisy Hill.
Okay. And
And that's the same name that in this recent filing by the prosecutor, the name that her son made up in order to send these emails, allegedly.
Man. This is, like I said, nothing will surprise me when we have these sorts of twists and turns in the story. What can you tell us about the, I think you were around, right in front of the Shakopee daycare that was raided, yesterday, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Give us some, if there are any developments on that story or the series of raids that we've heard about yesterday.
Yeah, there hasn't been any new information from yesterday, but just so everybody knows what's going on, there were 22 places that were raided, and it's various different types of investigations. There's raids regarding alleged daycare fraud. There's raids alleged stemming from autism program fraud, which even though these all kind of blend together, they're all very different things. And then also there were some of the places that are used to send money overseas, and a couple of those got raided. So the one in Shakopee that I was at, it was pretty interesting because that one is owned by a former St. Paul City Council member. So this guy who he was appointed back in 2019, I believe, to fill out the rest of somebody's term. He was on the city council. He ended up trying to run, but then lost his election bid after that. But anyway, he owns this daycare. I was there when they were pulling the boxes out and stuff like that. And then when it ended, there were a handful of children that then walked inside, and they were open even after the raid. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Nobody was arrested yesterday, so there's no new arrests or new charges or anything like that. It was just kind of like a big splash law enforcement action as the next chapter in all of this fraud stuff.
I think in one of your most recent videos, you also pointed out that in the case a lot of times of daycare, the allegation isn't necessarily that the daycare didn't exist, right? It's more, or that it was just a front. It's more often having to do with the numbers. Is that correct? How many kids are actually using it?
It's kind of a misnomer that kind of came out of those Nick Shirley videos, is that all these places are claiming to be daycares, but there's no kids there. It's more complex than that, because with daycare fraud, I mean, let's say, I'll give an example of a place that's committing daycare fraud. They would need to have parents who are complicit. Like, they would need to go get families that are eligible for child care assistance program funds, which means they're low income. They would get approval for that, and then their kids would be on the daycare roster. And then not only that, but then the way that the fraud would work in that case is, like, let's say that 10 kids come every day, and then they end up billing for 50, and they are 50 real kids that are on the roster. They just weren't really there. But then not only that, but then the parents would sign, or basically sign off agreeing that they were there. And that's where things like kickbacks and stuff like that, they end up, paying kickbacks to the families to allow them to commit this fraud, and then they benefit from it as well. That would be kind of like your textbook daycare fraud example. So it's very complicated, because in order to prove it, they would need to have surveillance and have cameras up to count the number of kids that are going in and out for a period of time over several days or weeks. And then they would have to wait and see how much they bill for, and then compare those numbers, and then they can prove that fraud is occurring.
Last item.
So that's why it's very complicated, and that's why like the FBI really hasn't touched daycare fraud before. Like our local BCA has done a lot of those investigations, and there's been very few prosecutions because it's very complicated and hard to prove.
Doesn't mean that it's not happening, that fraud's not happening. It's
it surely is happening.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's interesting about it. What did you make of the war of words between the governor and Kash Patel? The governor had a comment, I think, yesterday, basically saying, "Yeah, we're doing what we need to do on fraud. These raids are taking place because we have done our due diligence." Patel didn't particularly like that. I think Tom Emmer fired back as well. How do we decide who deserves proper credit when it comes to trying to hold the bad guys accountable here?
Well, it might be one of those things that Governor Walz is known for, which is just going a little bit too far on it. I mean, the BCA was helping with these raids yesterday, so it definitely was a joint effort. Okay, but as far as how did these raids originate? Well, it clearly was a federal investigation that's been ongoing, and Governor Walz said something to the effect of, "It's because we've been turning in these tips." And it's like, well, you didn't have to say that because that's not literally what happened here. And he basically gave Kash Patel an opening to make a snide remark, which also Kash Patel went too far the other way, claiming that it's nothing to do with you guys. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, I would say that Governor Walz maybe went a little too far with that statement. This is clearly a federal investigation, and especially like the autism cases, that there were 5 of those that were raided yesterday. Those have been going on for years. I reported on those investigations back in 2022, so that's nothing new.
So you're saying nuance is still dead. The moral of this part of the conversation is nuance, gray area, dead.
I didn't even touch that little spat, that online spat yesterday in my reporting, because I didn't want to have to explain it that far.
Understandable.
But that's exactly what it is. And I've in the past I have called out Governor Walz when he goes too far on those statements where he's taking credit. It's like, well, you could have just taken credit for being involved with the raids, because the state investigators were, and the state in Keith Ellison's office they were there, they were helping. And they have information to share with the feds, and they apparently are sharing it. So there's some collaboration going on here. But then to claim that it's a direct result of what we have done here, and that's why they're raiding, that's going a little too far.
Politicians can't help themselves. That's what we're reminded of yet again. They just can't help themselves. Fortunately, you're there or here to sort of set the record straight. That's why you're so respected on this stuff. You follow the story wherever it goes, and whoever's going to look good, whoever's going to look bad, or a combination of both. By the way, my sources say why are you in Wheaton today?
Wheaton. I'm back in the hometown of Wheaton, Minnesota for an author talk at the Wheaton Community Library tonight at 6 o'clock. Just going for a walk right now with my mom and her dog around the beautiful streets of my hometown, Wheaton, Minnesota.
And yet you still found time for us. That's much appreciated. Yeah,
always.
I appreciate you. Have a great session tonight. Now, refresh my memory. Do you read? A lot of authors, when they show up, they actually read a passage or two from the book. Others think that's a little too much, or they don't feel good about doing that. What's the Lou Raguse approach?
I think tonight I am going to read the first chapter because it's new enough in this whole book tour for Mastermind that a lot of these people I'm pretty sure have not read it yet. With Vanish and Vermilion, we were, by the time we were getting to libraries for book tours and stuff, they had all, for the most part, read it. It was an audience, ready to ask questions about what they've already read. So I just kind of play it by ear. But I think tonight I'm going to read a passage, and I don't think I have done that before.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, what if you find out you got a little bit more actor in you, as in dramatic stuff? Maybe dramatic arts is the next step for Raguse. You're on.
I was in the one act play back in Wheaton High School.
Is that right?
So.
What was the play? Do you remember?
Yep. There was a play called Next, where each character in the play was trying out for a play, and so I played a jock basketball player, and I think my name was like Rick Awesome Jones, and I was like, Rick Awesome Jones trying out for this play, like the surfer jock kind of voice. just really did it over the top.
So much versatility, man. There's just so many sides to Lou Raguse. Who knew? One other quick item, and we're very, very late here, but I'm hoping you're really busy, and maybe you would consider this story a little bit too trivial, but you've got good investigative reporting instincts. I'm trying to see if somebody can get to the bottom of what I think it was reported in the Star Tribune via NPR, if I'm not mistaken, that there's such a thing occasionally as in the city of Minneapolis as Mayor Fry piñata parties where people show up to beat on a piñata that apparently looks like the mayor's head. I'm trying to understand how we got to this place. I'm very curious about it. I guess it's been confirmed, but I'm just thinking if you're looking for something a little off the beaten track, it seems like it might be up your alley.
Dan, I think it's a great story. And from what I've heard, there's been times in which a mustache caricature has been drawn onto the piñata in kind of an anti-Semitic way, according to some of my sources. So I think it's a legitimate news story, and it's a sad reflection on where we're at as a society.
No question in both cases. Thank you, and good luck tonight. We'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Appreciate you. Lou Raguse, KARE 11, intrepid reporter. We're way behind. We'll get caught up. We'll prepare for Top 5 at 5. Kessler later in the 5.
Playoff time calls for Carboni's Pizza game day fuel since 1954. Fuel your Game 6 playoff party Thursday night by ordering at carbonispizza.com.
We got Top 5 at 5 coming up in just a couple of minutes. Kessler in the 5 o'clock hour. The gauntlet's already been laid down once again by Fallness. There's no way of all days you can leave the Top 5 at 5 lead the Top 5 at 5 with anything but hockey. We just did the whole first hour, literally start to finish, was hockey related. The insecurity of this man. And sadly, it reflects the insecurity of the hockey community.
I was going to say, he speaks for the community.
It's bizarre to me, doesn't it? I mean, now you should probably deliberately not lead with hockey.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You would never do anything like that, would you?
I would never do anything like that.
No, I didn't think you would. Isn't grandstanding and applauding your own efforts standard practice now? Talking about the raids, and the guest, that was Lou Raguse, saying that Walz was going a little bit too far. When has a journalist ever been performative? That's from 701 guy. I wonder if Kessler will take offense to that. We'll find out in about a half hour or so. And I had one more. Oh, well, going back to our conversation with Mitch Lawrence, and we've heard this before, that the people who like what Jaden said, some of them like it because he plays for our team. Let's be honest. We probably would be offended if he said it for the other team.
Most likely.
That's the way it works. But part of the reason it was so effective, I think, is it kind of came out of nowhere. It's not a guy who's known for constant rage baiting. And I think that it felt to that extent more authentic. Now, I know there are some people looking back on it and saying, no, that was all planned. He's trying to get Denver going. He knows they can't do anything about it defensively. So he is actually the quote-unquote trying to get in their heads. I get exhausted trying to figure all the nuance of that out.
I don't think it's that deep.
I don't think it is either, but it did feel authentic because it was out of nowhere, and it's like, whoa, we didn't see that one coming, right? Even if he was, as Mitch acknowledged, kind of stating the obvious, but it doesn't usually get stated by players early in a series as directly as he did.
I don't think he was playing chess.
No.
And part of it is we've seen him for 6 years.
It might end up being chess,
in
terms of the impact it had, but it was not.
Inadvertent chess?
Inadvertent chess, yeah.
That's just kind of how he is, to quote David Adelman.
Yeah.
He answers the questions. He never, I don't think, is thinking 2 or 3 levels ahead. I think he's just answering the questions.
It's not been a good look for David Adelman.
And that's how he thinks. By the way. No, it is not
been on a several
We got a lot of credit for how they did in the playoffs a year
He
ago.
did, and I understand
that's why he got the job.
That's exactly how he got it.
They went 7 with OKC.
They didn't have to pay him very much. Sadly, that's also part of the story.
You can go work in Portland when he's done here, because that's apparently what the Blazers are doing too.
Yeah, I heard about that across the board. What do we have for top five besides hockey?
No, I was going to say the only thing we'll probably talk about is a new Timberwolf has popped up on the injury report.
Oh, great.